Folks, welcome back to the Dinesh D'Souza Show. I am Kyle Seraphin, and I will be hosting today's conversation with one of my favorite people to talk to, a truly interesting man who has thoughts that are different from my own. His name is Ron Coleman, and he is a partner with the Dhillon Law Firm. He also hosts his own podcast, but most importantly, he called me a person who was too glib to work for the FBI. No one has ever told me that. I've never heard the word glib used in real conversation before, and Ron Coleman was the man to do it. You're going to hear some things that you probably won't hear anywhere else, some thoughts in ways that you haven't heard them in any other way. And I hope you guys stick around for this. One of these very enjoyable conversations with a person that I think is very special in the world. And he just happens to be someone that'll come talk to us today on this day before America's 248th birthday. Stick around. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Show, and I am Kyle Seraphin.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Podcast.
Folks, my guest today is Ron Coleman. Not Ronnie Coleman, not the bodybuilder. No, someone who is far more heavyweight in the cerebral realm. He is an attorney with the Dhillon Law Firm. He is the host of the podcast, The Colemanation, an entire nation of people who are either culminating.
No, we're culminating. There's no nation involved.
He's one of my favorite guys to talk to. And every time I speak to him, I walk away thinking about things for weeks and weeks, much to his intention, I believe. That is what he intended to do. So, Mr. Coleman, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining me today.
Good to see you again, Kyle. Thank you.
All right. So I've got a couple things I'm going to drop on the audience that you dropped on me, and I have been perseverating about, to use my wife's word, for weeks and weeks at this point. But I want to start with the Supreme Court because I know you've argued in front of them. There's this kind of push now. It seems like a lot of the decisions coming out are favorable to the political right, maybe to American liberty. And that means that it is no longer legitimate. And I'm curious about your thoughts, your reflections about sort of the overarching, sort of decisions that have dropped during this session.
Well, you have actually a moderately conservative court overall. It really comes down to really a down the middle court, but it's not a smooth division. Yes, there is a relatively hardcore conservative group, and there's a relatively hardcore liberal group. It is fascinating to see when they come together on things. The 9-0 decisions, are usually sometimes they don't, they don't turn out to be what you think they're going to be. And then there's kind of a squishy middle, kind of like American society.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of legitimacy, the left has been attempting to delegitimize everything it doesn't like for quite some time. One of the things the Supreme Court has actually done has been to say over the last couple of years that isn't going to work. I mean, it might work in your social circles, and you might enjoy predicting the end of the world, on a rolling 6-month basis, but you can't delegitimize the president, for example, by clapping him in irons after he leaves office, and thereby make yourself feel better about your policy defeats and your political defeats and your electoral defeats. I'm not saying that the court has had these things in mind, but the conservative decisions that you're talking about, to some extent, do legitimize aspects of governance and political and social life that most of us never really had any question about the legitimacy of. But
so you live in New York.
The language has changed, during our lifetimes. I think irretrievably. Words are never going to mean what they once meant.
Well, I guess that's the other question, though, because you live and work in the New York area, Jersey, and so on, and you practice law out there. Is there a cancellation fatigue that's happening on the political left? Do they realize that they've just burned through some of these words? Like, you call somebody a racist today and they just shrug it off. But 20 years ago, that would have been a real serious moment for self-reflection for most of us. And it doesn't seem like it has that weight anymore.
I think it doesn't. I think it really doesn't. If you haven't been called a racist by now,
You're probably a racist.
either you're a racist or you're not trying. You can't speak on public affairs, on topics that we're dealing with, without finding some way to offend people who are calling people racist. I don't really have much to do with the kind of circle, even though, yes, I am still in and around New York, but you can see what's happening in New York as well as I can just by looking at the papers and looking at, seeing how these various political leaders and the likes of Alvin Bragg conduct themselves. It is a travesty. People know it's a travesty, but they have given the keys to the most reckless member of the family. He's going to drive us into a ditch over and over and over again. I don't know if there's any coming back from the cultural and institutional harm. This crisis of legitimacy, to some extent, is self-defining. A big part of it, and this goes back to our first actually the first time you and I spoke, it was on my podcast. Law enforcement, the two-tier justice system, and also the use and abuse of law enforcement from its improper use during the COVID crisis to its utter non-use, going back to the many examples, of course, but the Trump riots and the Black Lives Matters demonstrations and now you've got people outside of New York being arrested for doing wheelies on Pride. I mean, these are heresy prosecutions. Okay,
that's right.
So the government has been co-opted in I mean, what we're really seeing happening here is the crystallization of blue state governments that have raised wokeness to not only to a state religion, but to one for which penal enforcement will be applied. And in the red states, there's a certain amount of pushback that's taking place. And unfortunately, one of the things the Supreme Court did was set that process back by holding that there was no standing in the Missouri case.
Right.
They might have been right about standing, frankly. They were wrong about denying cert on Rogan O'Hanley's case, but the cases they don't take are often the best ones.
I wonder if that's on purpose. Probably likely. The discussion that I had yesterday with Mike Howell from the Heritage Foundation, one of the things that was brought up was exactly what you just said there. And so my question to him was, are the sort of tenets of political leftism, of progressive leftism, of wokeism, or whatever we want to call it, are they sort of in the category of religion? And might they even be protected under sort of Title VII? As I read it, as a layperson, it looks like you could probably make that argument, and they seem to be treating it as such. You kind of just said something similar to that.
Well, I've had this discussion with a lot of people, including probably the first one I discussed it with was Chris Rufo, back when he would acknowledge my existence. Someone whispered in his ear, and he canceled on me. And since then I'm not on his radar. But he actually thought when I said to him, well, maybe wokeness is religion, he thought I was making the argument you just made, which was that no, it's a religion and it should be entitled to. So he was arguing that it's not a religion. But I've got numerous episodes of my podcast and speaking on other people's shows about the issue of religion. So some people say, no, it's not a religion, it's a cult. Okay, fair enough. Yes, it is. It is. It has the same sort of end of days millennialism to it. It has its own concepts of sexual morality, personal conduct, reward and punishment, group guilt, group merit, and it has tenets that may not be challenged. They are core to the catechism of wokeness. But the reason they will never be granted Title VII protection is because they will never admit, they will never say, well, we're entitled to our religious belief. I mean, it is an extreme. Look, we do have to reckon with the concept that there's a set of beliefs out there that are not associated with any religion. And this is a problem atheists have had, although they did very well in the 20th century in the courts.
Yes, they did.
But they want to take the sort of nullity position on religious principles and assert what's really a very fluid middle ground. Whenever you get into arguments with atheists, you always realize that they're advocating for a non-position. So they can always trash every other position because their position is essentially nihilistic.
Sure.
That is a struggle within religious liberties, philosophy, and jurisprudence. But yeah, that's where we are, and legitimacy goes to that as well, because yes, the church decides what is everything.
I agree with you that. So I like all the points you just made as far as under Title VII. The fact that I had never thought about it, the fact that they would not actually concede that they are a religion, because then they would actually probably have some ability to make that argument. I don't think they should make that argument. I'm just saying, looking from the outside and having read Title VII and read it pretty aggressively while I was trying to make arguments that didn't necessarily align with my beliefs as a Catholic, according to the Catholic Church, but it was my belief and many other Catholics' belief that there were problems with COVID shots and so on. So a lot of us said, look, it doesn't have to be accepted, in the canon of the established church. It simply has to be a sincerely held belief. It's actually fairly broad and coming from the tenets thereof. I think we're kind of talking about the same thing, and it leads us to this discussion about values. It's something that came up when I spoke with Mike yesterday, which is that America was really meant for a good and moral people that had a belief in a set of values, and that we can't implement this sort of this constitutional republic without having an underpinning set that we all kind of agree on, like this is right and this is wrong.
It's a problem, especially because we have, there's no question that the founding fathers didn't contemplate the Hegelian conception that ends up getting baked into Marxism, deconstruction of all the things that, as you say, the structure of our government and our political system and our culture were understood to be premised on. The founding fathers were Europeans. They had a conception. They had certain religious conceptions. Some of them were more or less church-going men. None of them were particularly Catholic or fond of Catholics. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, they didn't see fit, except in a couple of states, and that ended up kind of coming out in the wash, taking any action. In other words, there was nothing all that threatening about Catholicism that made them feel that they need to guard against it. They didn't have Hegelian philosophy and its offspring, and they didn't have Islam. And I think that's a real struggle for us, because both of those philosophies are, in fact, antithetical. I mean, neither of us is the first person to say this, and I challenged Michael Knowles on this a couple of times, because he said, "Well, what would the founding fathers say?" And I say, well, "Okay, that's fine, but how do you really, as a practical matter, we have adopted this idea of pluralism. Does that mean that everything goes? Do we have to say that everything goes?" So keep in mind, there is a group of people who call themselves the Church of Satan, Satanists. Mm-hmm. Very, very few of them are actually Satanists. What they mostly are they're Satanists in the way that motorcycle gangs who wore swastikas were supposedly they were Nazis. They weren't Nazis. It was, what can I do to shock you? Punk rockers. What can I do to shock you?
Yes. Yeah. They're contrarians. They're people that are looking for shock value, but not for actual religious tenets under it.
Right. And I remember when my friend Mark Randazza was representing them, and he took some position on some. Oh, and he was also representing some one of the really outrageous white supremacists, and they fired him as his lawyer because he was representing, this really repulsive person. I thought you're Satanists. I thought you worship the devil.
That's right.
How do you have a problem with this? Answer: we're not. We're just liberal. We're just liberals. We want to make our parents feel awful. That's what it's all about. So how do you protect that? And how do you rationalize not protecting that? And that's something that I think we're going to have to reckon with. You were talking a second ago about sincerely held beliefs. And there's a general rule in religious liberties cases that courts don't inquire as to the sincerity of a person's beliefs, because what are you going to, if you do,
how are you going to adjudicate that?
How are you going to adjudicate that? We can say, well, listen, according to canon law, according to Jewish religious law, that's not really a thing. So now you are a religious court.
Right.
They make sure that so the answer, I think, is going to be that we're never going to get that answer. We're going to continue to struggle with it. But what we can probably do is to start looking harder at not the principles themselves, but about the sincerity itself. Are you really? Is this a political statement as opposed to being a religious statement? And when people were calling our office on religious exemptions, trying to help them get religious, or they applied for religious exemptions, I found that to be an argument I would not really want to have to make in front of a judge.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it works, it's the exception that eviscerates the rule. Everyone's personal life philosophy isn't necessarily a religion. Some people cannot believe that there are people in the world who don't work out, and they. We're serious. Like, how could you do that to yourself?
Yeah.
How could you let yourself go into middle age and old age without taking care of your body? I mean, and you can really hear screeds. Is that a religious belief? Of course, no one would say that was a religious belief, but is that a sincerely held? So the First Amendment definitely doesn't say whatever you really, really, really believe. That we're going to protect that. There's some kind of limit, and I think it's going to always be a you know it when you see it kind of thing. I don't think there's any way to avoid that, but we probably should drill down a little bit more. A lot of this. My wife writes for Legal Insurrection, and right now the beat that she's covering, and it's not one that she necessarily chose, but it's sort of developed as the work developed, is all this litigation over trans rights and trans rights in the schools. And these teachers and these doctors who are pushing for these so-called rights are so freaking insincere. It's just dripping off the page. And what you really see, I mean, there was one case where the doctors, this was the Texas Supreme Court last week, said it upheld the Texas law prohibiting gender-affirming care.
Sure.
And they said, there were two sets of plaintiffs. One was the parents, and one was the doctors who perform these extremely expensive procedures. And Texas said, look, parents, prima facie, you're in charge of your kids' upbringing, but we don't allow this is not what they said. We don't allow child sacrifice. Okay, we don't allow child trafficking. There's a limit to. We are, as the state, going to step in and say that there's a limit to what we're going to allow you to do. And to the doctors, the doctors said, we're being deprived of our right to perform these procedures. What? Wow.
What right? Do you have the right to put surgically implanted horns in? If that was something that we talked about Satanists, right? Like, what if they want horns? And what if your child is also in the Church of Satan? They need horns. Are we going to do that? Are we going to put metal under their, into their skull? All these things, as you said, they become very, very unserious almost right away. But I actually want to touch back on a point, and I want to do this right after we come back. We're gonna take a quick break, and then I want to move into a discussion about how first we must obey. And then we can understand something you dropped on me that I think is going to really bother people, and it has to do with that attitude of trying to upset your parents, like you just said about the Satanists. I think this actually all goes into what's going on in this country right now. So stick around, folks. We're going to be right back.
You might have heard Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way they used to. They've been part of this cancel culture, and so they want to pass the savings directly on to you by having a $25 extravaganza. Now, when Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one-product company, just the pillow, but with the help of his dedicated employees, Mike now has hundreds of products, some of which you may not even know about. So to get the word out, I want to invite my viewers and listeners to check out their $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use MyPillows, $25. MyPillow sandals, $25. 6-pack towel sets, $25. Brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, $25. And for the first time ever, the premium MyPillows with the all-new Giza fabric, just $25. By the way, orders over $75 get free shipping as well. The amazing offer won't last long, so act now. Call 800-876-0227. The number again, 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com. Make sure to use the promo code. It's DINESH, Dinesh.
All right, folks, I've done this podcast a few times. Balance of Nature is one of the big sponsors. I've never seen a discount this huge from Balance of Nature, and this discount is for a very limited time only. So today is the day to order. If you've listened to Dinesh for any period of time, you've heard him raving about Balance of Nature, the amazing fruits and vegetables supplement. You've heard about the customers, how much they rave and love Balance of Nature, and how good it makes them feel. If you've been on the fence about ordering it, today is the day that you can jump off the fence and land. Because right now, for a very limited time, Balance of Nature is taking 50%, that's half off your first set as a preferred customer during the summer savings promotion. But you've got to use the special code America when ordering. Take their risk-free money-back challenge today. Use discount code America and get 50% off your first order. You can also call 800-246-8751. Again, that's 800-246-8751. You can order Balance of Nature online at balanceofnature.com. Use that discount code America, all spelled out, to get 50% off. This is an extraordinary offer, and you can get it today. 50% off your first set. Discount code America. Sales of oil have historically been predominantly in US dollars. Recently, oil producers such as Saudi Arabia have been exploring options for sales in other currencies. Oil sales in other currencies would lessen the demand for the US dollar. Are you tracking? So we ask you this. If there's less demand for the US dollar, what happens to that US dollar? This is one of the reasons why you should consider Birch Gold and why they are a valuable resource if you want to protect your investments and your assets. For over 20 years, Birch Gold Group has helped thousands, tens of thousands of Americans protecting their savings by converting an IRA or a 401k into an IRA in physical gold. To learn more, you can text Dinesh to 989898 and then claim your free, no obligation info kit on gold. Birch Gold has earned the trust of their customers with an education-first approach. They have thousands of happy customers and countless 5-star reviews. You can protect your savings with gold before that dollar plunges any further. Text Dinesh to 989898 today. We are back with Ron Coleman. He works with the Dhillon Law Group, as he just mentioned earlier, some of the issues of people coming to their firm and not being able to take certain positions. We're going to talk about something that he dropped on me on my personal podcast that has sat with me and has grown, like in a very nice way. He said something about the Jewish scriptures and the laws that the Israelites had to obey. We look back as Christians and we see that as the Old Testament, and we said that for all time, first you must obey the law, and then you can understand it. And the implications of that are really intense for me, Ron, because I'm a parent and I've got little kids, and I see this parental experience that grownups will have, that adults have, with God if it is well developed. And it's the same as kind of growing and watching your children. I told you so just do what I said. Why? Because I'm your parent, because I love you. And you can't understand it right now because you're 7 and you don't know how these things work, right? And we have that sort of need. We do it as children with our parents, and then we do it as maybe teenagers and adults with both our parents, but then also with this movement towards God. When you said that to me, did you understand that sort of parental relationship? Was that what you were talking about?
Yes, absolutely. The idea I was referring to is, any Jewish educated people who will be familiar with the scriptural words "nasiv" and Nishma. We will do and we will hear, which is what the Israelites said when at Mount Sinai, and God said, "I got an instruction book for you."
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get an instruction book from you buy a new air conditioner, a new TV. Well, of course, none of us ever look at the instruction book, do we? But those who are responsible, and certainly if it's something as important as your life, or something as important as, a really expensive appliance of a type that you've never used before, you don't say, look, it says not to leave this in the rain. I'm not really sure I understand why the rain should be a problem, so I'm going to leave it in the rain. You don't say that. You say, no. The people who made this, they should presumptively be understood. Now, I might learn, this happens all the time, right? Think of all the stupid ass instructions that they give you. I might learn over time that this will be fine with that. But at least as a starting point, I trust the creator of the product and the designer and the guarantor of its pleasant use and its appropriate use, how to use it safely and how to use it properly. The only way you can do Nasiv and Nishma, we will do and we will then listen, is if you accept the premise. Doesn't have to be, by the way, 100% understanding, because that's the same problem. You'll never get 100% understanding. Remember, God said to Moses after the golden calf, he said, "Hey, listen, I've talked you out of destroying the Israelites for this terrible sin. We've actually kind of gotten close during this. Can I see you?"
Okay, we had a little connection issue, which we're seeing a little bit of this interference on Ron's side. This is what happens when you try to drop real truth on him. You were talking about God and Moses having a discussion. Moses wanted to take a peek behind the curtain.
And God says it is axiomatically impossible. You can't ever know the whole thing. So now we're negotiating over how much you have to know in order to accept that God is the boss. Once you accept that God is the boss, then you say, okay, I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to follow the directions, which just as a parent does, they're for my benefit. Unlike a parent, God is perfect. A parent can give you bad advice. There are parents who are abusive parents and parents who are poor parents.
Yeah.
We need to be presumptively grateful to and loyal to and loving of our parents, but sometimes they blow it. God doesn't blow it. This is the premise of the entire discussion. We want to, especially as Americans, we want to come to things our own way. We are like children in this respect. We want to know why. We want to understand. What we fail to comprehend is that you don't understand certain things until you live them, and that is really the path to growth.
Just for the benefit of the audience who has not been ruminating on this for weeks like I have and years like you have, one of the things that occurs to me is the number. Think about any time that you've gone to your parents when you get to an age where you could go to them and be closer to a peer, even though you're always their child. And you say, "I'm really grateful that you held me to account to that really unreasonable standard when I was a teenager, when I was a fool, when I wanted to be a Satanist and I was trying to wear a swastika on my leather jacket to be a jerk and upset people. I'm really glad that you gave me a standard because it gives me a true north. And by knowing what true north was, even though you leave the path, you can always get back to it."
Yes.
And so I'm grateful for that opportunity to, 1, know what was right, 2, being able to do what was wrong and make that mistake, and not so much that I couldn't come back and recover. And you mentioned that you thought that we might be kind of in this unrecoverable place with our institutions. I feel like we might actually be in the normal cycle of human history, which is that we get a little bit of everything, then we screw it up, and then it turns out that I'm seeing God's hand on things in the last couple years in a way that I have not seen in the rest of my life. Maybe I'm more educated, maybe I'm more open to it, or maybe there's a heavier push right now of providence in the world because we're seeing validation of things in our own time that generally doesn't happen. The speed of the internet, the speed of which things are moving forward in the political environment. But even my friends and I are seeing vindication where, most people who get crushed by the government, then they die crushed, and then their family might be made whole. And this is happening in a period of years and months as opposed to decades. And that is interesting to me. I'm just curious if you have the same thought thinking about that.
Well, you're making the white pill argument, the Michael Malice's argument. I might have mentioned that the last time we spoke. It is possible that this is the point of no return, but that doesn't mean for the whole world, because God runs the world, and he has promised not to destroy it again, or destroy humanity again. So there's a path. There's a path to goodness, and what we have to remember is that there are going to be people who are not going to make it there with us.
Mm-hmm.
That's unfortunate, and we don't really want it to happen. And people that we love should hopefully be brought around to understanding that. But the good, yes, what you described is very powerful, because the good has an inherent power to it, not only because God is good, but you might say only because God is good, but on a more prosaic level, it's the power of construction, of building, of progress, of growing, of all these things that are the opposite of the nihilistic movements that are so dominant in the dominant culture. We're probably at a point of no return for that culture and for that society. But those people, what's an amazing thing to consider is how few of them have children.
Yeah, no, that is a terminal pathway. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about transgenderism or whether you're talking about sort of the dink phenomenon, the dual income, no children, I'm just going to live for me, this hedonistic kind of thing. That can only really exist, and it goes to the thing that you said, the second thing that has just been weighing on my consciousness since we last spoke, which is that America right now is cursed with abundance. And many cultures and many people have been cursed with abundance, but I haven't quite heard it phrased that way. And maybe people haven't thought of abundance as being a curse, but you can only have Satanists who believe in nothing. And you can only have dual income, no children who look and say, my genetic line ends here. And I'm fine with that. When you have complete abundance to the point that we do right now, there's actually some biblical precedent for that as well. Maybe we can kind of dig into that. Let's talk about abundance.
Well, to go back to our, the main story, there were many among the Hebrews who left Egypt who didn't want to leave because it was comfortable. Relatively, yes, slavery sucked, but you always had square meals, and you had you knew what your deal was. Just like people said about communism, you knew what or mobism. You make your deal with Capone, and as long as the envelope was filled, once a month, you knew what you were in for. This is not freedom. This is not growth. This is just merely a form of non-dying, and it's a short-term solution to non-dying. We see this, many times, obviously in the Bible, but just throughout human history. This nihilistic concept is a luxury. But I think I've heard a great term, luxury beliefs. People who don't really have to worry where their next meal is coming from. So, all the attacks that have come on to, I'm sorry, not attacks don't come on to, all the attacks on the work ethic, and on and the idea that meritocracy is some kind of ideological or white lie.
Yeah, that has any sort of ethnic thing. All of this is what we would sort of colloquially call first world problems. I like luxury beliefs as well. That's a much more generalized version of it. But first world problems. My Wi-Fi doesn't work. I'm poor me. I don't have fast enough internet. I have a glitch on my video screen. Poor me. These are my buddies would call them white people problems just because it's really funny to make it racial. But it just turns out that it's a curse of abundance issue. It's a luxury belief issue. Right.
And so there's this belief, I think the way I explained it when we last talked was that we can continue trashing institutions. We can turn the Ivy League into garbage heaps because we're always going to have this incredible wealth. And those of us among the elite who run these things will continue to use these great institutions to connect with each other and to find our mates and to network and none of the stuff that we're doing to make ourselves feel good about our abundance, the DEI, the assault on science and on logic and on those things aren't going to harm us because we're never going to run out of this. We're going and it's Disney and it's Harvard and it's every we'll never run out of, and it's every single city. We'll just keep raising taxes and just giving out money. No, what happens is people stop producing, people stop excelling, people stop trying, and what we've even seen, and I don't think I thought I would see it during my lifetime, is people actually express contempt for the idea of excelling and contempt for the idea of achieving and contempt for the idea of quality. These things are actually real threats to the mediocrity. And plus we've also got, reinforcing this phenomenon, this incredible growth in the public sector and also the leech sector that comes along with the public sector, and that is, all the consultants and all the DEI crap that has been enabled by the growth of law. People who really have become used to living very, very comfortable lives without in any way achieving or adding value to the lives of others. So that's gonna leave a mark.
Yeah, that's true. That being said, I feel like there's this swing that happens, and I think the Book of Kings is the one that my wife was just pointing out to me the other day. There's a great history of this. It's like, yeah, you follow the law, things get pretty good, everything feels pretty good. We get comfortable with the abundance. We have an expectation. We just say,
waxes fat.
And then we kind of sweep the infrastructure that propped up that abundant culture because we say, well, all the skeletons and the underpinnings and the values are no longer necessary. We get off the trail. And then you look around and you're like, oh, there's wolves out here and things are really bad and we're going to get cast aside or we're going to be killed off or we're going to lose a big battle and all these things. And so people kind of, through hardship and austerity measures, which are self-imposed because of stupidity, we end ourselves back going through that hard time. And that cycle of hard men create these good times. It perpetuates itself, but it's a biblical cycle. It's been around for at least the entire Judeo-Christian tradition. It seems like it's just a human cycle. We just get comfortable, we get lazy, and then bam, we come back.
So our challenge as individuals is to learn from history and from the Bible and from the ethical teachings that our parents have provided for us as a prima facie standard, and say, how can I avoid those mistakes? So how can I? Where did I put that user's manual? Maybe I didn't throw it out. Maybe it's in the drawer with all the user manuals. Oh, what do you know? There's a fuse there. I didn't realize that. I can just replace that fuse. Oh, I'm not supposed to keep it out in the rain. It's still there for you. But you might have to, what you find is that the further up the curve you go, the more you understand about what you didn't understand before and why God wants you to do things that way, but also the more you understand that you don't understand, but by virtue of that previous experience, you're okay with it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the hardest thing. Americans don't like that. We want to have all the answers. We want to know what all the things look like. We want to go out there, but that's not the way that America was actually founded. That's not the people, the good and moral people that went out there in the world. You mentioned that people may come here as some people are not going to survive this part of the experiment. And that's always been the case for America. I think Ben Shapiro says it really well. He says nobody was guaranteed success. They were only guaranteed a ticket for the journey. And it turns out, whether you be a Taoist and you follow an Eastern tradition, or even if you follow the sort of the Western traditions now, the journey is part of the reward. I mean, that's the founding process. Like being on the journey and failing, whether you're a Jordan Peterson type and you think that, the journey is suffering and you just assign meaning to it, that's kind of a pessimistic look. But there's some great joy. I think people stepped off into the unknown for all of American history. We've just gotten to the point where we think we know everything. And we're about to be humbled, I feel like, but not in a bad way for some of us. Some of us kind of knew that was coming.
Well, Kyle, you talked about recent events and you talked about the last few years, but really the last few weeks have been insane.
Right?
And we have seen the curtain drawn back on so many things, or even the drawing back of the curtain from the process of curtaining. Mm-hmm. This whole idea that we had no idea Biden was, you really?
Yeah, we don't believe them, but some of them must have actually believed what they said. I always try to think of the bell curve just because it's helpful to remember that, half the world is below average. And so they must like other below average people. They must listen to other below average people and believe them. It must feel comforting. So some of these people in the media that we're seeing, they must have actually believed some of what they're saying. Their incredulousness is not faked.
No, you're 100% right. It's kind of a little bit like what I said before, that this is who they are. Mm-hmm. There is, I think, a category of people who know damn well that they're lying to us, and they're black-hearted, wicked people. But the capacity for self-deception, and this also connects with your point about waxing fat and getting lazy. We rationalize. We say, well, this is okay. Listen, when I was younger, I had to work out, but I mean, of course, it's the exact opposite. But we rationalize, and there are so many, because Trump is so bad that it can't be. It just can't be. And you
have to
end
destroy the institutions for this guy.
And the next thing you know, you're doing, you're selecting people for work and execution. It is an eternal cycle. And again, the opportunity for us is there to learn from the past and to learn from our own mistakes, and to see what can we do to improve our world in a meaningful way, not a way that necessarily feels good, but that is right. That's a big challenge. It's a challenge it's a lifetime challenge.
The upside, and I think you honed in on it earlier, is that these people with the worst ideas and the worst instincts, whether they be black-hearted or they just be foolish and stupid, is that they aren't breeding. These are actually sort of naturally terminating events. So if you choose certain types of style of life, even the people that are the climate pagans, as my friend George calls them, that the climate pagans, where they're looking for redemption by doing some sort of homage and green work to Mother Gaia, like they also think that having babies is a bad idea. So their religion, or whatever we call it under Title VII, whether it be sincerely held beliefs or just lunacy, all of those things are sort of religions of converts, if anything. They don't actually produce fruit, which is amazing for those of us that are homeschooling and truly radical and out there, having babies in the world, because, from this sort of dead stalk that terminates on its own, we can have a fresh green shoot. We only have to move a little bit up current, I think. And maybe that's why I keep feeling so hopeful. The last few weeks has gotten me in a mood where so much of this has been revealed. The wildest part for me, I guess, is I knew a lot of these things because I've been in them. Some of the things about the weaponization of government, I've seen them. I knew that they were always true. And now everybody else is getting a chance to see them too. That curtain has been pulled back. So I can't help but laugh about it and say, in the long run, truth usually wins. Martin Luther King Jr. said it, and I talked about it this morning. He says that, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But it doesn't mean it bends in your own time. But today we're seeing the truth sneak out left and right. Like they cannot put enough shroud over this thing for it to be revealed, whether it be at the Supreme Court or our president bringing, now he's got his son coming in, I don't know if you saw this, but Hunter Biden is now advising Biden, like every 55-year-old crackhead son likes to do to a doddering old man who runs the free world. You just want your kid to come in and help you out. It's amazing.
Everything we thought we knew about how the world worked and about the standards that people would hew to, out the window. And we're so reluctant to be seen as judging. In other words, applying those standards in a public way. And look, I understand that because it comes across really, really, really bad. Except that one side kept doing it. They just do it with that according to the woke religion that we were talking about before. So you are a non-person. I mean, listen, I put an article up, which was a rewrite of an old thread of mine about racism. And, you have a right to be a racist. You even have a right to say racist things. I might not want to hang out with you.
Mm-hmm.
And and we have a legal system, and that legal system will prohibit you from discriminating against me on the basis of, whatever if I'm one of the subjects of your racial animus. But that doesn't make you a non-human.
No.
This whole idea that we had of punching fascists. Who the hell are you to? Again, the Nazis were terrible people, and they engaged in genocide. They used violence. So violence is but you can't just use violence against people because you don't like their views, because they're standing between you and something you want. I mean, this is basic stuff. But once you start chipping away at, the low-hanging fruit of traditional values, then it's really nothing stops you from the gulag. It sounds so facile. How though? How do we say to a modern people in a modern age, you need to go back to a traditional way of viewing right and wrong? And Kyle, it's amazing to me. I went through, YouTube decides what you're going to watch sometimes. You have it on kind of in the background. And if you have ADHD, you get your work done while other things are being played.
This is a terrible plan. This is a terrible thing to do.
YouTube recently decided that I wanted to watch a whole bunch of cop chases. Okay. And all these people, my boyfriend's car, my fiance's phone, no one's married in these classes of, in the non-elite classes, other than the religious communities. No one's married. People are having babies with multiple parents. Elon Musk, king of the world. Okay.
Yep. I noticed that too. Everybody loves him, but he's doing some things that are not particularly logical.
He's acting like a potentate, like a Roman emperor.
Yes.
It's sleazy.
Well, as we run out of time here on this, let me wrap this up, because what you just said ties back into the thing that, like I said, it will sit with the listeners for a while now. I promise. First, you must obey, and then you can understand. These people, the answer is obedience first. And that is very, very hard for Americans today. But those who have gotten it already feel the burden lightened when they do so.
And anyone with a military background, by the way.
Yeah, they know.
You go through training.
Yes.
And you realize learning how to follow orders and learning how to, how basic techniques of things that soldiers do, they're not open for discussion.
Because people die during those things. And it turns out,
they die spiritually and socially on the same conditions.
Brilliance. That's where it is. Ron Coleman, thanks so much. Where should people follow you? Do you want them to follow you at the Colemanation, your podcast?
Colemanation podcast is great, but start with X, Ron Coleman at Ron Coleman, and then the whole world of Ron Coleman is then opened up in front of you, because I push my content on the world constantly. So then you'll find my videos. I've got a YouTube channel, but X is really the home base for me.
And for people who are looking for a starter on how Ron Coleman operates in the world, go find a video of him standing in front of a giant hot dog in New York City.
I had to share it.
It is peak Ron Coleman. People watched it and they said, "Why did you make me watch this?" And I was like, "It's very, very important. You must watch it."
It wasn't very long.
No, it wasn't. It was good.
It was a regular size hot dog.
Yeah, it was huge. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate your perspective on this as we go into this 4th of July. I hope you have a lovely 4th of July, and happy birthday to America from us and from you and from everybody. Let's go out there and do America. Thanks, bud. Folks, I could talk to Ron all day, as you can probably tell, and Ron can also talk all day. It helps out when you are a litigator who has been in front of the Supreme Court. You know a lot of things, and you've seen a lot of things. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something from it. I hope you took away the two things that I continue to ruminate on, and you will as well. Number one, America will be saved by those who care about America, who have those good and moral beliefs, which means first you must obey, and then you can understand. That actually includes the things in the Constitution as well. You don't have to understand why they were there. You just have to obey them and follow through. That's what the oath of office is. That is what the oath of enlistment is, and the oath that happens at commissioning. Those of us who signed up for military and law enforcement service, those of us who served in the private sector as civilian employees of the federal government should know these things. And it is our duty to make sure that those who are there follow through. And the second thing is, and maybe the most important thing, is that the arc of the moral universe does tend towards justice. We're seeing it. I told you yesterday to be hopeful. Our friend Mike Howell came on and gave you some reasons, some action plans, that there are movements in there. We are seeing fissures in the political left that we have not seen. We are seeing divisions. And as we just talked about today, some of these ideas, a lot of these sort of ethos, these religion-based, wokeist, progressive leftist ideas, they self-terminate because they cannot continue under stress, and they do not move towards propagation. They are dead ends. Biologically, they are dead ends philosophy and philosophically even. They just don't make it. And they are the opposite of what America is about, which is about moving forward and about making things better for the next generation. They are not making things better. That's our job. It's your job. And as I encourage you to do, use America as an action verb as you go into this 3rd of July, this evening, when many of you will see fireworks displays the 4th of July, where we'll celebrate the 248th birthday of this nation. Go out and do America. Do the America that you believe it should be. And we're going to win in the end. I'm so much more confident in the last few weeks, as we just talked about. It's just been a really, really telling time. I hope you guys have an optimistic time. I hope that you go out there and see bombs bursting in air and remember those who gave their lives for this country, those who are still willing to give their lives for this country, and those who are willing to give up their comfort and their freedom, people who will step into the political arena to do good on our behalf with those traditional values that have always guided this country. God bless you. God bless America. Have a great 4th of July. We'll see you again on Friday for a wrap-up. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.